Hello, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing Live, show number 553. I am your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you so much, and welcome to March. March Madness in many ways. Wow, political landscape changes, war in the Middle East, so forth. Not to get into the politics of things, strangely enough, today's topic is more close to home about how we operate than it is about how we derive business from a marketing perspective. But I think there's a need to understand the ebb and flow of demand to our marketing skills and marketing efforts as it relates to what actually it produces. We often are confronted with the ROI discussions and net cash flows and things that we talk about, and we're really more completely tethered to the idea of top line gross revenue, generating as much money on the top of the proverbial funnel as we can for it to be sorted through in gross costs and so forth. And that's kind of where we are for our topic and conversation today. Is there is so much what goes on to how a hotel, business in general, but hotel in particular to our conversational topic, exists and how it operates, that it seems baffling to some people, like, why did we stop spending on marketing? Why are we going and getting all OTA? It costs us the commission to do that. Why is it that we're doing well with our marketing spend, but we're going to stop because we hit a budget limit? Why don't we just put more money into it? And instead now we're going to a more expensive channel because we're no longer spending money and making better money for it over here. As I got more to approaching this topic and how to crack that nut of talking through some of the influencing factors associated with this, it really centered around cash flow and how businesses have to operate. And the difference, there's always a variety to the ways our industry operates, our hotels operate, as to whether they're singularly owned, cluster owned, where they're managed and then used for an asset or a REIT group, so forth. So I thought it'd be a bit of a paradox to come up with an old adage of a pound of feathers or a pound of iron. Of course, this was used as an analogy for tripping people up, kind of like if an electric train was traveling 100 miles an hour and it had a wind behind it of 100 miles an hour. Which way does the smoke go? It's an electric train. There's no smoke, although strangely, electric trains do have smoke. Not going there. But the idea of a pound of feathers or a pound of iron isn't about the weight. The weight is defined. Back in the days, you used to trip people up like, oh, which weighs more, a pound of iron? Because mentally, iron seems to and does weigh more than feathers. But it's not the question. We already identified that there's a pound of each. The variable is the quantity. A pound of feathers is by far much more voluminous to create than a pound of iron. Same too, in paradox of that, is revenue. There's good revenue, great revenue, not so great revenue. What dictates a lot of that is how we work that funnel. We talk a lot about top line revenue, our goal, top line revenue, generating top line revenue, maximum dollars in. Everything else is left to how things get operated, the P&L statements and so forth. But the real catalyst of decisions is, in addition to the top line revenue, the amount of resource we have to work with, is the cash flow that the business needs to operate. And the business operates on three basic levels: a short, intermediate, and moderate window of time. You have your daily costs, you have your weekly costs, and you have your monthly costs. Daily costs can be simple vendors, food deliveries, and so forth. And I don't say that they have to pay on receipt always, unless it's alcohol or something you have to pay once received. But food and so forth, there's terms and conditions with your vendors. How long before they require you to pay? And depending upon your credit capability, how good you are to say that you will pay on time, then they will extend the credit for a certain distance, for usually 30 days. And in the accounting world, and I'm working in dangerous territory as my wife is in accounting, you have the largest number that's most relevant to operations, and that is accounts receivable. When you're looking at daily activities, you're of course looking at your night audit report and so forth, and how much actually was made that day, how much cash literally is at the fingertips of distribution at the end of a particular day. And the night audit report reflects that. Night auditors are the ones that accumulate all the bookkeeping for the course of the day and put it into the reporting that gets submitted for everyone to begin to understand the cumulative value of what's going on per day. And that is people paying cash for the rooms, not as often as before by many means. Credit cards, did the credit cards go through? They themselves have terms of reimbursement, days delay before it gets processed and put through. And they even have their own bounce backs and so forth and costs and so forth that are associated with, but that's cash flow. And then, of course, you have all of your receivables, billing that you've put out to group sales and pre bookings that people are making that they have paid for that accumulation of money. Now, if it's a retainer of money, that often can't be confined as being spent, but it is held, so there is a liquidity value to it. But you understand that cash flow is important because bills roll around at their time too, just like we do in our own personal finances. You have your fixed costs of your rent or your lease and what have you that you have to maintain, and those fixed costs happen all the time. Those processes have dates and times that have to be paid for. You have to have the cash available to pay them. So a lot of times in the world of financing cash flow, you have how much money do you have on hand? And usually when you're working with a management company or an entity that you're one of a part of, the accounts everything goes upwards into their control. And then they allocate down to you the monies that you need to pay the bills that you have given at any particular time, the schedule of payments that you have to create. In the course of that ebb and flow of money comes to when you're tight for cash flow, is how well can you stretch a bill? You were due to pay a vendor today, but you have been allocated all the money to include that vendor's payment, so that now you have to let the vendor know or wait for them to let you know that you didn't pay them. And that buys you an next window of extra time for that money to be given to you to be paid for them. In the world of vendors, it's a henpecking order as to how important and priority, how much of an influence on their business do you make by not doing the business, if you were to suspend your services to them or your product to them, as to really prioritizing making sure that you get paid. Now, some legal requirements like liquor and so forth have to be paid or you don't get to buy liquor. So some of them have to get paid regardless, right then and there, transaction values. And credit lines are often given as to how long you can take, as I mentioned, before you get these payments to it. But the real costs, there's two: fixed and variable. Fixed is the things like your mortgage, things like you have insurances and things that you have. Electric can sometimes go into fixed. It's not really, but it's a standardized cost. There's usually a pretty persistent usage factor associated with utilities and so forth. And then you have variables. Some of them are almost fixed in the sense that is payroll. There is a amount of payroll that exists, and there's some variations as to total hours worked and so forth. But for salaried people and so forth, that is a fixed cost. So payroll works in that world of having to make sure that you have the monies to put into payroll, to have into payroll, to fund payroll. So when you write your payroll checks to all your teams and staff, those checks cash. Again, all of this is tethered to cash flow. And we're going to bring this back to why are we talking about this when it comes to hospitality marketing and why it affects what we do. And it goes back to the pound of feather and pound of iron. So in all of these expenditures, you have also amounts that are kept for certain things. You've heard the phrase FF&E, which is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. You maintain a pool of money, like an investment savings, allocated out of your amount of revenue being generated, that is kept in reserve, cumulatively building for your annual, biannual, 3 annual, 4 furniture replacements, room renovations, technology upgrades, refurbishments in public spaces, so parking lot resurfacings and things like this, the cost of replacing the shuttle bus because it wears down after a number of years. These are things that you need FF&E expenditures for. Now, as I said, cash flow cycles tend to be daily, weekly, and monthly. Again, the daily, you're talking about maintaining what you've made that day in sense of cash flow and income flow that you actually say is yours, just waiting for the reimbursement of it. Credit card receipts getting fulfilled and so forth. Weekly, you have your payrolls your vendor payments, and you're always monitoring your accounts receivable in the sense of the billing that you send out for groups and so forth, or wholesalers or what have you that you work with for paying what they owe you, getting that in so you have that cash available to be used. Then in your monthly aspect of this, you look at this from a P&L perspective, your monthly P&L. You look at where you've spent your money. Did it fall within your expectations? If there was variances, you have to explain them. Why did you spend more or less or whatever have you? And you have your cash flow forecast. How are we looking for cash flow? And how are we pacing for that for our needs that we know on the horizon? We know when our bills are due and so forth. So we need to know that we will have enough cash to handle the payrolls and the costs and the bills and the vendors and so forth. This is where it begins to come back to us in marketing. So a lot of the hotel expenses can be fixed in the sense that they're a persistent cost. They're not always variable. Rooms is a perishable product. Their inventory, as we know. You can't resell a room you didn't sell last night. That's forever lost as value. And there is value to the room to use it, and there's value or cost in the room to not use it. It's an idle cost. This room, the space, the maintenance, and everything else has a fixed value to this. 3 shows ago, we talked about all the GOPARs and RevPARs and all the variable acronyms associated with how we measure the metrics of revenue in comparison to where we get it from and how it can be applied to the entire property. This is where those conversations come back in, where we talk about revenue related to our inventory sale capability. So our fixed costs, the room costs the same amount of money each day to exist. The cost of the room, the lost revenue of the room is variable to what you could have charged for it but didn't get it sold. That one doesn't get used by a lot of people, although we talked, like I said, 3 weeks ago, and we referred to that as being a great measuring asset as to your pace of success. But going back to that, we'll keep going with this. So we're really going to talk about the cost of maintaining the room. In the world of this room, there's a cost every time it gets used to clean it and put it back ready to be sold again. And that is figured out into the amount of hours that it takes or time it takes for your housekeeping staff to clean it, the maintenance costs associated with engineering, the fixed cost of the electricity, the air conditioning, and all the things that go along for its usage, and the general wear and tear and eventual replacement of the hardware, furnitures, and fixtures and things that is in the room, plus the associated costs with all the rest of the hotel, the hallways, the common spaces, the parking lots. All of that has dumped into a hopper and says, if I have these many rooms in my hotel, this is my cost of each one of those rooms to maintain. And that cost can sometimes be variable as to how much it takes for you to run it. Of course, if you're paying your housekeeping staff more than the next person, then that cost gets factored into the cost of turning that room. But you have a variable as to how to sell it, which is why you hear so many times the need to demand higher and higher ADR, because the cost of the room is here and it stays about there. But the ability to make more money off of that inventory is your variability of 2 things: the price that you can ask for it, and how often you keep it full. Now, going back in my history, I had the privilege of going to the Hilton's School of Revenue Management. Back in the day when it was quite different than anything that really exists now. Your hotel had to spend a lot of money to send you there. It was mainly for front desk managers. There was not a revenue manager at the time. It was just front desk to learn revenue management. And you were there for 10 days, but anyway, and you were given a series of tests. Now, if you didn't pass the test, you were sent home, and they didn't refund any of the money to the hotel. You didn't pass that test, and you were out. You had to pass the test with 90% or better. They wouldn't tell you your score, but if you passed, they would let you know, and they wouldn't tell you who's better or who worse or anything like that. But you always tried to, but you knew in the class it was. Anyways, and you had to go through these tests all the way to the point where you're finally completed with the program. And one of the classes that was fascinating, because it went in a whole different direction than the professor, was he wanted to argue the point in the traditional cases of which is better, a higher ADR or higher occupancy. And the fictitious mathematics to this were if you had a 100-room hotel, which would you rather have? A full hotel of 100 rooms being sold at $50 ADR, or 50% of the rooms at $100 ADR. And he picked 2 of us to argue each opposite point to that. And I lost. What I thought I lost was the coin toss on this, where I had to argue the full occupancy. because the argument really, in a very superficial way, when you look at it, is you want less occupancy and higher rate because you create less duress on the property. Because your 50 of the rooms are not being used, so they're not getting worn down as fast as if you had the whole hotel full at a lower occupancy. So I'm sitting there just, okay, what can I talk about that's going to somehow support the idea that I want a full house? And I started going through variations to it. Well, from an investor's perspective, knowing that the hotel is full shows that you're getting your fair market margin for what you're doing. Although with the lower ADR, you're not getting your full market value, but you're getting full market portion to what you're getting. You have a full house, so you're full. And investors would like that, knowing that they can always increment up ADR, but they know the demand is there to fill the hotel. It was a loose conversation to that. But then we started going off into these tangents about the value of making money in an empty space versus making only money in half that space. And yes, there is the financial benefit of having a higher ADR for the lesser inventory usage, but you have intrinsic factors. And it kind of was neat that they brought in the marketing aspect of it. Your guests are in a half-empty hotel, so they're wondering whether they picked the right hotel, which reduces lifetime value relationships. That one I got tossed in on my side, which was great. The other is that, again, from a marketing perspective, your popularity drives interest, which is easier to continue that demand and actually increment up higher ADR, where the reverse, having high ADR and low occupancy, you're struggling to consistently justify why you're asking for so much yet feel so little. So we went through the process and began to realize is like, so where is the value of the cost of the business okay to accept a higher cost than scrapping for the smaller cost, but the lower production? So in other words, and I've had this argument with ROAS forever. As a marketer, return on ad spend is a big marker for marketing. I spent X dollars, I got Y revenue. That relationship is a ROAS, return on ad spend. But it doesn't factor the KPI that's most interesting for ownerships, revenue managers, operations, and that is gross revenue. How much total revenue did you bring us? And that goes back to the start of our conversation from today's show. Cash flow. I need cash to operate. So I don't have a housekeeping staff that I fire and rehire like a breathing organ every day. I can't have 50 housekeepers, and then because I don't have enough house people staying in the hotel, I have to get rid of half of them because I only need half of them for the half that's in the hotel. That contributed to my conversation at the Revenue Academy because that's another thing. Having a full house means you're able to stabilize your demand on labor. Now, it's not an efficient cost, but it is a sustainable, consistent value that you're maintaining for that. So you have less recapture in new hire costs because new hires cost so much to bring in. There's the training program before they're up to speed. There's a whole process where they begin to turn productive to the level that the previous person they replaced is worth. It's a whole concept with that with HR. We have a fascinating HR podcast on our radio station that goes through exactly that contrast of what is the actual arc curve value of a replacement person to an existing person and why it's better to reinvest stronger into your existing person than it is to acquire a new person to replace them at a lower base cost. Really good discussion. Anyways, digress, but it's on the radio station. Look for hospitalityradio.com. So there's that one stabilizing factor. But going back to the need for cash flow, we have all of these fixed expenses that are required at the hotel at all times. We have to pay for the electric, we have to pay for the gas, we have to pay for the insurances, we have to pay for the existence of things in a persistent, consistent way. Gross operating margin is what this is all based on. You have your breakdown as to all of these things cumulative, less the fictitious, they make up 75% of your total top line revenue. So if you make $1 million, make a number, 750,000 of that, 75%, is related to all these costs. Then it starts breaking down past the EBITDA line, earnings before income tax, depreciation, amortization, for all the other things, the fixed costs, the insurances, the loan notes, all of those costs that are there and stable, and you persistently have to pay them long before they ever get to the net asset value or net asset flow to the investors. So with that, cash flow becomes a very critical measuring stick for how you derive revenue. So going back to my analogy of, or not analogy, but referencing to ROAS in comparison to total revenue, I could have a great 20-to-1 ROAS, but my total contribution is too small. So even though I'm successful in the margin of cost, okay, I'm not successful in the margin of contribution. So really the question that needs to get asked is that's contribution margin versus a distribution cost. We're so fixated on a ROI and distribution cost. This channel costs me, an OTA channel costs me 20% in commissions. Oof. Okay, so I want to do these channels, which are direct channels and so forth. They only cost me 10% cost, or direct channel might cost you 5% cost. But here's where we run into the problem. We have a budgeted amount in our P&L, profit and loss statements, and in our budget that says this is how much money we've allocated for this month to spend for marketing, okay, for our direct channel. And although it's doing a great return on spend, it's doing 10-to-1, okay? There's no other place to draw cash flow monies from to shift to it that we take away from anything else that we can put there. We can't take it and say, well, we're going to take it out of our FF&E fund for now because we need money, we need cash flow because we have to pay our marketing bill to Google. You know, they want their money. We have to have the money available to them, so it's cash flow. Where we don't have cash to put in there. So all of a sudden, we find out that we have to stop spending a very successful ROI-based platform, direct channel, and rely upon opening up more inventory to a higher cost channel like OTAs that are performance-based, meaning until they produce, it doesn't cost anything, but when they do produce, you have to pay more for it. That's where all of a sudden you're going, oh my, people, you know, they're driving me crazy. They shut me off. I was really going like gangbusters, was making great money, blah, blah, blah. And now all of a sudden everything's going over to OTAs because my budget ran out. And you hear this persistently. And one of the solutions is have what's called a flexible dynamic budget that allows you to shift and allocate according to similar or sympathetic channel costs, where you say, okay, tell you what, Google's going like gangbusters and Meta isn't. So we're going to shift the money from Meta over, okay, where the money is there is money there, and we're going to take that money, we're going to put it over and pay Google because that's really doing benefits for us, and see if we can get yield as much out before we have to truly go to a higher cost channel. The problem that comes up with these kind of budgets that aren't as popular as they should be is there is this use it or lose it mentality when it comes to budget. If you didn't spend the money that was given to you for something, then they gave you too much money is how they think. And I mean, they being investors and owners. They're looking and go, you asked for $10,000, you spent $7,000, so I only need to give you $7,000 from now on because you didn't spend $10,000. When in fact, with a dynamic budget, you can simply say, you gave us $10,000 for this. It was not producing at the level where we would have used it to sufficiently correct when there was a better yield over here. So we reallocated because we came within the margins of the categories of the spend that are available. The $3,000 we didn't or plan on spending over here and put it over into this channel, which was higher productive and better yield opportunity and value. Those dynamic budgets, I wish were more used, but they tend not to be because it requires an understanding on both levels of the conversation. The people above it, they give the money, and the people below it to know how to ask for what they want the variable to be. But there's a worse scenario to this when it comes to going to a higher cost channel to maintain cash flow. And that is that businesses, and whether you've operated your own business or not, or involved with the finances of a business, know that there's always a measurement on cash flow. What is our liquidity line persistently? Are we capable of satisfying our current in-time debts with monies? And there are times based on an aging receivables, all of a sudden you went from 30 to 60, which puts you in a dangerous spot. You weren't getting the money flow, cash flow coming in that you needed, and payrolls due. You can't not do payroll. So now all of a sudden, you need cash. And it's not like you walk out to the street and start tossing a lot of beds out of your room hoping you can do a bed sale, okay? It's, I need cash. So what they have is business lines of credit. You go to an established relationship that you already have with a bank, and with a negotiated value of what it is you need, you have short-term and moderate-term debt to take on to pay your bills. Now, it's not simple this as well. You know, if I get and take this money out and pay it back within 5 days, it'll be good. It always costs money to borrow money. Even if you use it only for 5 days, the terms of borrowing it literally mean you have a percentage to pay back when you return it. So it's a very expensive aspect of that. So think of it in ways of, well, which is worse? Opening up inventory to OTA where you're paying a 20% commission, or paying a 10% interest rate on a lump of money that you borrowed, but you had to pay that 10% on that lump of money regardless of how much of it you used. Say, for instance, the terms of the agreement are that anytime you borrow money, you have to borrow a minimum amount of, say, $50,000, and there's a minimum 10% cost to doing that. So now you have to pay those thousands of, say, $5,000 on top of the 50,000 you borrow. So you have to give them back $55,000, or you pay a 20% commission, and it gives you cash flow because the OTAs pay you when it's fulfilled. Now, of course, it has to get actualized, so it's not always in the month for the month, but what they're booking and selling, okay, when it gets actualized, they pay you for the actualized. That's your accounts receivable. So it doesn't magically happen overnight. You have to know your cash flow well enough ahead to know if you're going to fall off a cliff. But with OTAs, it's better to pay their commission at 20% and have that cost for $50,000 of additional revenue, okay, and not have to pay the larger debt and have cash flow from it than it is to take a $50,000 debt, pay 10% on it, and have to pay it all back with no cash generation from it. These decisions get made by financial people in the organization persistently. That's why all the monies go up if there's a management company involved, and it's pooled and allocated in a way to make sure that they never get themselves into the cash flow jeopardy where all of a sudden they don't have money to cover their costs that day, that week, and they have to go and find outside financing to cover even the temporary circumstance that it creates. That's why it's so critical how accounting works within the organization of operations and management. So they always have a benchmark. You have a revenue manager, and you tend to think that they're always tapped into all things revenue. They're tapped into the demand levels of what revenue they need to make for all of these numbers to work in margin. That's why they're so driven to, if there's room to raise ADR, because remember, fixed costs of a room or the hotel costs tend to have more fixed cost than other things. The more they can raise the revenue or the cost, the price they can get for the inventory that is perishable and gets sold, the more margin they have to operate, which also, when covering all the fixed costs, allows more margin for the owners to attain more money in their pocket for making the risk investment into operating or running or buying the hotel. That's why you see the ADR. That's why also you'll see where there are times where you just stop using great productive channels because they don't have a way to fund those channels, okay, past the line of what they were already given. Again, dynamic budgeting and or a very knowledgeable up and bottom conversation as to, well, let's take it from here. That's this, but it has to be categorically in there because remember, if you take from something that's completely unrelated, the pool improvement program, and put it into Google marketing, the pool program, who are you going to explain to you that now scheduled and having its own vendors and bidding and everything else that's supposed to go on doesn't have the funding for it, and making the more money off of Google, then that money comes in top line, and now you have to say, well, we got to put the money back into the pool funding program, but where? Because it's room revenue, food and beverage revenue, so we made more business, but the money went to the departments that generated it. How can we get that money back to the pool improvement program? A lot of times there's just no bridge that does that. And or the company doesn't want to figure out a way to say, we're shifting and moving. We're going to take where we have it and put it where we need it. It doesn't always happen. So they look at a degraded cost value relationship. Going back to my start of the name of the show today, a pound of feathers or a pound of iron, which is heavier. Sometimes having more costly generated revenue is worth it compared to lower generating, lower cost revenue opportunities. Obviously, if you can maintain volume of production at a lower cost, that is your ideal relationship. Great ROAS, great ROI, just banging it out, plenty of money to put towards it because it keeps working And that's one thing that when we talk about self-funding models and so forth that are so cool, is because it allows you that unlimited constraint. uh, you don't look at a budget line item, for instance, for an OTA. You don't say, I'm only going to give OTAs $10,000 in commissions this month. You'll take whatever business they give you if you're willing to accept the cost of commission for it, because it's only performance based. The only bill they're asking for is the bill related to what they gave you, what they produced in revenue. I made these bookings for you. And they're going to wait until they get actualized so they can get paid in that sense. With that, compared to, I have a budget line item, and when I run out of that budget money, I have to stop whatever that money was being spent for, because I can't have another source to pull from to put monies to it, unless it's symbiotically related or dynamically connected. So self-funding models work wonderfully, because then there's the opportunity to continue to explore the unconstrained demand question. Unconstrained demand, for most people, is what Airbnb has done to us in strange ways. Unconstrained demand is a hypothetical that if you could satisfy everyone that was interested in your market, what revenue would that be? And that's what we have when it comes to what Airbnb does for us, because as we know with Airbnbs in our market, VRBOs, as the demand comes to our market, there's a flourishing expansion of unconstrained inventory. More and more people are willing to put their Airbnb and VRBO inventory out in market, because there's so many people that want to come to the market, they can sell it at a good rate. And it's worth it for them now to sell it. What it does to us is it dilutes our value, because we can't go past the price point we normally would if that inventory wasn't available. Because if you're the only game in town that has inventory, you can shoot for the stars and go for your back of the door rate. Back of the door rate is an old analogy that you used to have and still do have to indicate your highest price that you can charge for that room on the back of the door of the room. So that's the optimum of what you can charge for that room. You can't go more or you're going to be price gouging. So unconstrained demand means if you had only your inventory, you would be able to maximize the amount you could charge for that room for the demand that's to your market as unconstrained. With Airbnb, that changes the modality of metrics of how you price yourself. That's another story for another time. So I hope through some of this, there's an understanding that, as frustrating as it is, finance, cash flow, and value of having that cash flow, that liquidity, is a much stronger influence on the decision processes of where to get the business sourced from. That it's goes to how we do our marketing right now. When you have low demands, you give more inventory to OTAs, because they're spending the money to try to sell you and your market to anybody that's interested. They're in that upper world of trying to get in front of as many people as possible. As we talked about with generative AI and so forth, we're also able to get into that space more often now. Okay, but again, we've talked about it, and we're talking about accounting today. And when we have high demand to our market, we give less inventory to OTAs, because we do not need their assistance. The demand is already coming to our market. We don't need to pay them to bring us business, because the business is coming to us directly. And we also don't have to spend as much money for it, because it's being brought to us natively for the interest that's already in there. We don't have to advertise the interest. So we get to margin out as much more value of top line revenue because of that. That's the ebb and flow of it. That's why it's a symbiotic relationship with OTAs. They're not the bad person, okay, or business, but they are very much will take advantage of the inexperienced price marketing revenue person and or your control of inventory if you allow them. If you think that you just keep them as your booking engine or you keep them as your source of marketing, you will forever just pay them, because they will do all of that and more, and they will always get their margin for what they can sell you. And it doesn't mean they're always going to sell you. They're going to sell you in addition to anything else that's in your market, because they're out to sell a room, not necessarily your room. So with the process of looking at channels of opportunity, while you have the funding capable and you're yielding your greatest cost ratio, ROI, ROAS channels, realize that there is a margin of success on the volume of production that they can create. If you don't know your channel contribution percentages, you should know them or learn them quickly. You need to know how much your direct channels contribute compared to your OTAs, compared to your OTAs, to your wholesales, your consortia, your groups. That whole value relationship needs to be understood. Because if your direct channel is 20% of your total business, and it's never been more than 25% of your total business in the best of days, it will never replace your other portion of business that might be 40% that isn't producing and costing too much, it can't take on the additional load. Remember, we talked about stress testing budgets back during budget season last year? We do it every season. That's where you start drawing comparisons. Which channels can be helpful augmentations to other channels, seasonally, whatever, time frame wise, and which ones can't. And those are the ones you need to be able to shift your money back and forth between when necessary, if the production isn't as valuable as you would want it to be, before the decisions have to get made of looking at higher cost channels like OTAs, simply to hopefully have them drive the volume of traffic we need to keep the consistent cash flow so that we can hit our daily, weekly, monthly billing markers that we are faced with operating the business. So this is one point the last time we talked about this, because I kind of like skipped a rock over the top of the lake on a lot of these things. There is a massive amount of notes I'm putting into the show notes related to the processes of the levels of distributions of the total cost of things related to how it breaks down after EBITDA. I don't explain EBITDA in the notes yet. People do want to understand what EBITDA is, because that is a threshold of value proposition. Everything below and above it makes a difference. And you do need to look at how your part as a marketer works in the top line revenue, and how you need to be very sensitive to the production volume. Okay. Again, going back to the statement that it's contribution margin, not just simply cost of acquisition. You need to know how much of the revenue that you're generating cash flow wise is in contrast, not just to the cost of getting it, but how much it's contributing for all the things that it needs to be used for. Well, anyways, thank you so much for letting me dance through the hip hop, skipping, and jumping of the accounting process of this. I'm so glad my wife wasn't in front of me, because she would be correcting me all along the way for variations to what I just mentioned. She handles business accounting and would be a much better person to describe all of this in great detail, but I wanted to keep the marketing twist to you for today. For everyone that watches us around the world, 209 countries that we broadcast our TV channel in, thank you so much for doing so, both live and then the replay versions whenever you pick it up. We do recast at 11:30 Sydney Australian time, 11:30 London time on Wednesdays, both of them, for their respective time zone coverages that are a little bit more equitable. For I Love Lucy reruns of our show, both searchable by host, topic, and or data broadcast, you can go to hospitalitychannel.tv. There's Hospitality Radio as well. We do, that's in 39 countries. We broadcast linearly topics about marketing, sales, HR, accounting, operations, persistently about Industry 4. If you catch us on the TV channel, it is on any smart TV, including Google and Amazon and Apple and Samsung and Roku and all the rest. Just look for Hospitality Channel. The show's always on the free side, along with a vendor showcase thing for new products coming out all the time to keep an eye on. And then there's a pay gateway if you want to know more information about hospitality. In general, the show is it's also simulcast on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch. And we do have it with several industry associations and industry corporations that are generous to have us broadcast this on their Facebook pages and YouTube channels. Thank you always for that support. What am I missing? Oh, we translate the live show in 11 languages. Mentioned that already because of the diversity of the 209 countries. And if you're a hospitality marketer and want to talk to and become a part of a community of other hospitality marketers, you can join us at hospitalitymarketing.club. If you have any questions, feedback, comments, what have you, please reach out to me at lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. I answer each and every email associated with the show or the podcast. And so with that, my name is Lauren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time. I look forward to talking to you all